You made a very famous photograph while you were covering the state capitol.
Yeah, brought it with me. Denmark Gruber. Denny, for years afterward, used to say, you know, Bob, you showed my ass to the world. This picture ran on the front page of every major newspaper in this country. Ran in Newsweek. I have a copy of that here. But what happened here was, I always carried a camera with me. In the event that I was in a situation based really upon my experience in the civil rights era, if anything happened that I happened to see, that I could shoot it. Well, there were a load of photographers in the house at this point in time, but for some reason, I was the only guy that saw Denny run out the back door and jump over the rail and tear the clock. I was the only one that got this picture. And it's an iconic picture for Georgia politics. It was entered in a Pulitzer competition and unfortunately came in second to the Ruby Oswald picture. So I got bumped by Ruby Oswald. But you know what used to happen, I mean in this thing here, it was George T. Smith was the speaker at the time. He, they couldn't make a decision on how to reapportion. And he stopped the clock at 10 minutes to 12 because they had to adjourn sine die at midnight. And so he ordered the clock stopped and they continued the debate for several hours. Usually on the last day of the session, the legislators, I don't know about today, but back then, drank a lot. I mean, so there was a heavy dose of alcohol floating through the place. And I guess Denny had a drink or two, I don't know. But I saw him bolt after the vote, in which his guy lost out in the reapportionment. And I saw him bolt, and then I figured, what the hell's he going? I looked up at the balcony, and there he was, coming, you know, and I had my camera, and boom, got him. But he, you know, Denny, I liked him. He was a nice guy. You know, his political views were very different from mine. I think he later recanted as he was dying about some of his views. But I didn't know he was a fighter pilot hero in World War II. I didn't know that until I read about him at some point in time. Mm-hmm. Distinguished guy.
The Black Sheep Squadron.
Yeah, you know, just that surprised me. You know, he didn't look like a fighter pilot. A little too stocky. I don't know if he could fit in a cockpit. So that, I mean, that was an interesting evening, to say the least. You know, that was fun to watch.
Why did you leave your job as a reporter?
Well, as I said, we were sort of bored with Maddox. I wasn't making very much money. You know how reporters were paid in those days, probably still are today, for all I know. And I had a growing family, I had a wife and 3 kids, and I was working for the Morris newspapers, but I was also stringing for Newsweek and the New York Times, just trying to make a decent living. And you know, I'd work 16-hour days, and I just got tired of it. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll go to George Goodwin, who had the Bell and Stamp, the biggest public relations firm in Atlanta. Goodwin didn't want to hire me. So I decided, well, I'll go try it on my own, figuring that if I failed, I could always go back to being a newspaper reporter. But as it turned out, even at the very outset, we were very successful. We hit a bump in 1974. There was a real estate recession. Cushman lost everything he had in it, but he was an honorable guy. He wanted to somehow compensate me. He owed us about $150,000. He had a big ranch down in South Georgia. Hopefully the name of the town will come to me. It was called Malawden Ranch. And he had thousands of Black Angus cattle on that ranch with a magnificent southern mansion. And he said to me, Bob, I can't pay you the money, but I'm going to give you 100 Black Angus cows for $1,500 a piece. So here I am again, a Jewish kid from Brooklyn with a herd, which was okay, except for the fact that shortly thereafter, meat prices plummeted and feed prices went up, and all of a sudden I'm feeding these damn things, you know. So I said to them, we got to get rid of the cows, man. I can't take it. So we had an auction, and I took them in at $1,500. They were auctioned off for about $600 a piece, which was okay, except for the fact that Cushman was so desperate, he kept the money from the auction, and I had to sue him for cattle rustling. Now, you know, in business, collecting receivables is a very distasteful thing. And the best story I remember about that, down in Tampa, there was a guy who had been a policeman. His name was Captain Smith, but he retired from the police force. He was developing things for the police, clubs, handcuffs, whatever. And he came up with an idea called a killer keychain, Captain Smith's killer keychain, and he hired us to promote it. What it did was, if somebody attacked you, you'd take your keychain and push it up against and put an electrical shock into it and throw them back about 10 feet. So his receivables built and built. He wasn't paying the bills. The problem was nobody wanted to go down there and try to collect. You know. Oh, those were fun days.
Cohn and Wolf.
Yeah, Norman Wolfe was the editor of the Orlando Sentinel-Star. He went through a divorce in Orlando and he's a very proper guy, and he was very embarrassed by it. So he moved to Atlanta, and I met him, and at that time at Colony Square, there was an ice rink in the middle of Colony Square, and he and I met in a little fast food restaurant that was next to the ice rink. Must have been 45 degrees in the restaurant. We were shaking. But talked about it, and I landed up giving him a third of the business, and I felt that he had administered a large staff of people. Those were skills I didn't have. And in fact, whenever I speak to a journalism class or a public relations class, not that often these days, but I always tell them, you got to get over to business school, because sure enough, after 4 or 5 years of this, you're going to be handling people, and developing budgets, and you need to get into business school for some of this stuff. So I had none of that background, and Norman did. So he was we were a great combination together because of our different skills. Mine was creative and selling, and his was managing the business. Norman, much older than I, and not in great health today. But we had an unbelievable run, and I sold the business. And when we sold it, we had 24 offices around the world. The company I sold it to, WPP, out of London, Cohn & Wolfe, the company I founded, now has 63 offices around the world. It's amazing, really. Mm-hmm.
Are you still involved?
No. I ended in 1998 after the Atlanta Games, and we had a tremendous amount of Olympic, but I was something of an Olympic expert, having worked for Coke on the Olympics from 1979 on. We made a lot of money in 96, 97, and then decided it was time for me to go.
What makes a good PR guy?
Well, there are different kinds of people in the public relations business. I was there to make money and to have fun. I wasn't there to solve the world's problems. Then there are guys in that business who are there to solve the world's problems, or corporate problems, crisis communication, all that kind of stuff. And I really didn't have any interest in that. My interest was in taking on things that you could have fun with, that were lighter than that. Now, we got involved in some heavy stuff, like what was Ernie Vanderbilt, what was the guy's name? I'm trying to remember his name. Who was close to Ernie Vanderbilt, a legislator?
Peyton Hall?
Peyton Hawes, yeah. Peyton Hawes hired us to, when Carter was in president, to fight for the funding for the Russell Dam. And Steve and I came up with a campaign, and which we played against Congress. Carter had killed every major water project in the country as a way of reducing the budget, including the Russell Dam. So we went to Washington and we developed a campaign, both ran it in the Washington Post, and we had came up with the idea of delivering special stuff to the congressman that was very unique. In the Washington Post, the ads that we wrote said, "Give a damn, vote wet." I mean, it was good stuff. And then what we did is we had that same line on. We got big sheets of steel, not something you could put. Big sheets of steel, and we had those things delivered to every congressman's office. In other words, you couldn't throw it in a trash can. You had to get rid of it some other way. But it stuck with them. And then we had a box of rocks from the river, and we put them in a box, a black box. And it's what we said is the only thing that's down there that we're going to wash over these rocks. There's no animals down there that are endangered by this effort. And sure enough, they voted for it. They overrode Carter and voted for it. So that was a very big thing. We handled the extension of Georgia 400, the opposition to it. We handled that. We handled the opposition to the fourth runway at Delta at the airport. We handled the expansion of the interstate system. In terms of handling, I mean, we handled the public relations to soften opposition to these things. Mm-hmm. So we did a lot of that kind of work later on. Early on, in 1974, we handled 6 political campaigns, and afterward vowed never to do that again. I took one guy down to the Atlanta Constitution and got their endorsement. 3 days later, he decided to drop out of the race. I felt like an idiot, So there were 5 left, and they all won. Every one of them won. Only 2 paid. I said to Steve, "That's no more of this."
In fact,
I got to tell you one guy. Ford Spinks was one of those guys that didn't pay. So we held a fundraiser for him, and I got Chip Carter to come down to speak at the fundraiser and raised quite a bit of money. Ford kept it all. we were hoping that would result in us getting paid. Nah. Bad business.
Didn't you once have an ostrich race at?
No.
You didn't?
No, that was Bob Hope.
Oh, Bob Hope.
At the Braves.
Well, he was once associated with you, wasn't he?
Yeah, he worked with us. He has his own firm now, very successful, and a very talented guy. Yeah, we hired him from the Braves. We had some really top-notch people. Lee Walburn worked for us. I could name a lot of people that you would know that worked for us over the years. In fact, I think we created an industry. People would leave with some accounts and go somewhere else.
It's said that you added glitz to public relations.
Glitz?
Yes, in Atlanta.
Yeah, that's probably true. I don't know if you'd call it glitz. I guess it depends how you define glitz. We did a lot of things that had never been done before to promote clients. And if George Goodwin would have described them as glitz. Both he and I were pitching KLM, the Royal Dutch Airlines. And he told the guy that was handling the pitch that if you hire them, all they're going to do is plant tulips up and down Peachtree Street. And the guy said, "That's just what we're looking for." So, it was those kind of things that, but a lot of it was serious. But then again, I could tell you all kinds of crazy things we did. When I say crazy, effective crazy things we did. Maybe the best example of that is, like I said, we handled, I pressed Coca-Cola in 1979 that they weren't doing anything with their Olympic sponsorship. So I wrote a program, had 23 elements in it to put into place at Lake Placid. I went into the old Coke boardroom, panel walls, pictures of all the guys up there. I'd never been in a presentation thing like that. And long table like this, Roberto Goswetto was sitting at one end, and I was standing at the other end. And it was warm in that room, you know, and of course I was nervous as hell, so I began to sweat, you know. And I went on about the 23 different things, and I didn't see him make, his face never moved the whole time, and I said, you know, not only am I going down the tubes here, I'm thinking to myself, but all these guys in the room who brought me here are going with me, you know. And it was over. He said, Mr. Cohn, that's a treasure trove of ideas. But he said he had to pass it before Paul Austin, who was then the chairman of the company. One of the ideas we had was, as each team arrived at Lake Placid, let's say from Finland, that we'd get a sheepdog, a Saint Bernard, and put a can of Coke around its neck in Finnish, take a picture, and send it back to Finland to the media. And Austin wrote in a column of that particular thing, "Don't use puppies. Puppies piss on people." So we did the other 22 things.
You mentioned the mixed drink bill that made Atlanta a convention center.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Well, the Marriott Hotel was building the first new hotel in God knows how long in Atlanta. And J.W. Marriott went to Sanders and said that we have to, we got to sell mixed drinks at this place, and you got to help us get it done. And a coalition of House members, all of whom I knew well, Jim Hull, Bill Fleming, Charlie Jones from Hinesville, Harry Dykes from Columbus. They were the guys that plotted how to make this happen. If you recall, the only way that could happen was to handle it as local legislation for Fulton County only, and the speaker could just gavel it through in the afternoon when they handled local legislation. But there was one guy from Northeast Georgia, and I cannot remember his name, unfortunately.
Howard Tamplin.
Was a confirmed dry.
Howard Tamplin from Madison, Georgia.
Yeah. Sat in the house, wouldn't move while local legislation was being passed. So Hull said to me, "Bob, you cover this guy?" And I said, "Yeah. You know, he's in our territory, Augusta." He said, "Why don't you take him out in the hall and interview him?" Which I did. And they gavelled it through. That was the only time I've ever participated in anything like that. But that's really what happened. That's how that bill passed. And, you know, just interesting. Of course, he went nuts. You know?
I can
but
imagine.
it stood. It stood.
You've had a very successful PR business, and you sold out to some firm. But I understand after that you also formed a new company here in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Is that still in?
Biggest mistake of my life.
Was it?
Yeah, I got into business with two people. Unfortunately, one of them was fiscally irresponsible, and the other one went on a 2.5-year alcohol binge. And from the very outset of the business, shortly after it began, I realized I had to get out of here. The thing that was hanging over my head was I was a co-signer of a note, and they not only co-signed on that note, the other two, but they took an additional $500,000 loan, which I was not a party to, thank God. I would have never signed it. In any event, it wasn't until last year that my suit against the company was settled, where I paid my third of the first loan. And you know, but 4 years before that, I was gone. I mean, I just didn't want any part of it. It was a woman who had fanciful notions about how to finance things, and she was stupid. She was very creative, but not very smart. Jekyll Island ran up about a $250,000 tab on her. Then they fired that guy down at Jekyll Island, and the next guy wouldn't pay it. I assumed all along she was telling the truth, that she could back it up, that she had the emails and the letters and the contract. She didn't have anything, you know, so I had to walk away from that. Just a very unpleasant experience. And a guy who had been with me for many years, who I had a lot of respect for and wanted to go into business with, he hit the alcohol trail. You know, he'd go to Bones. He'd come in around 10, go to Bones at noon, and either not come back or come back about 3. And you know, there was nothing, no work he could do. It was a sad situation. Same thing with Steve. It was sad that he got into drugs. You know, very troubling. Mm-hmm. But that's the way it was. So I haven't been a part of that in a long time.
Didn't you one time be very active in real estate?
What do you mean active in real estate?
I thought you at one time owned the Sears building in Chicago.
No.
That's not you?
I owned part of a big tower in Houston, but it was sort of a tax dodge, and of course I had a small, maybe $250,000 worth of it. I mean, it was multi-millions, and what happened was investment firms got people to, you know, put up the money because there were terrific tax benefits to it. That was the only reason I ever got into that, and I never made any money doing that. You know, no, real estate is something I've done well with the homes I've been in. Sold our Buckhead home for a huge profit at 2 years before the market crashed. Mm-hmm. Thank God, you know. And moved out to Cobb County, where taxes are almost non-existent. It's a good thing. Yeah. So no real estate.
No real estate. Getting back to your company, Cohn and Wolf, you were very active in that for how many years before you sold?
28 years.
28 years. You had some very responsible clients.
Oh yeah, we had big clients all over the world.
Who were some of them?
Well, Coke, of course, Chick-fil-A, AT&T, Bausch and Lomb, Kodak, you know, on and on.
And you did public relations and not advertising.
Right, right. Strictly public relations.
Tell us, give us an example of what you would do, say, for AT&T.
Well, let me talk to you about, well, AT&T, we had handled for a long time, and when the Olympics came to Atlanta, were coming to Atlanta, I was part of what they call a dream team, AT&T, with a guy from their advertising agency, from their promotional agency, from their direct mail agency, and from their interactive group. There were 5 of us. And I negotiated with A.D. Frazier to sponsor the Centennial Olympic Park. And we put this $6 million edifice out there called AT&T's Global Olympic Village, where we entertained about 15,000, 20,000 people every night off of the stage. The PR piece of it, which was great, was that NBC was the television network. So in the first floor of the Global Olympic Village, we made studios available to every NBC affiliate that was coming to the Olympics. So every night they'd be broadcasting from the AT&T Global Olympic Village. Unbelievable coverage. That was the PR side of it. I mean, there were other benefits, other public relations benefits to it, visibility, you know, which was terrific. Great entertainment, you know, Ray Charles, I mean, a big name entertainment. It was, you know, it was quite a project. But so that was part of a team effort to come up with that concept. in terms of something that I did by myself, which I was very proud of, is there's a lot of stuff that I did that I can look back and say that was pretty good stuff. At Calgary, the Calgary Olympics in 1988, I sat at a table, a conference room table with people on my staff, and I said, what is you can't do at the Olympic Games? And the conclusion was you can't commercialize the opening ceremonies. So I said, let's do that. Let's figure out how to do that. And had never been done before. As it turned out, the Calgary Organizing Committee was short on cash, so they were looking for help. And I went to them with the idea, went to Coke first with the idea of forming a world chorus where Coke bottlers around the world would hold contests for singers who would then become a part of the Coca-Cola World Chorus in the opening ceremonies of the Calgary Games. And we made that happen. And the coverage of that, Jim McKay did 5 minutes during the opening ceremony on the whole Coca-Cola thing, what they had done. You know, we got David Foster to write the music for it. It was just an unbelievable breakthrough in terms of looking at a situation from how difficult could it be, you know.
That was that the famous Coke chorus that sang?
No.
It's not the same thing?
No. This was a whole new ball game. A lot of the stuff we did for Coke in the Olympics was breakthrough, not done before. And they do most of it, they continue to do most of it right now, you know.
You were actively involved in the planning for the Olympics in Atlanta, weren't you?
Yeah, I was the governor's appointee to the Metropolitan Olympic Games Organizing Committee. Not Organizing Committee, Metropolitan Olympic Games Authority, which I served on for 8 years with the mayor and all top officials. George Berry was on it. And our job was to make certain that the city, county, and state were not encumbered by any debt. So we had to approve every contract over $100,000. And that's what we did over an 8-year period. A lot of politics involved in it, and not only Maynard, but also the guy that followed him in, what's his name?
Campbell.
Bill Campbell. Forgive me. Joe, again, forgive me on these names. He was the head of natural resources.
Tanner.
Joe Tanner, yeah. And I, there was one of the final pieces that we had to approve was the construction of a facility at Lake Lanier for the rowing venue. And as it turned out, Billy Payne and his people had hired a company out of Dallas to do it because they were renowned for having, that was a specialty of theirs. Well, Campbell objected to it, wanted minority participation. And both Tanner and I stood up in opposition, and he called us racists. And I said, no, you know, I mean, these are the only guys that know how to do that. Who else are you going to put into this thing? And he made a lot of noise. It made the headlines in the newspapers. And then the next day he quietly recanted. I mean, it was all a sham, a show. It was, you know, a joke. So we had to handle issues like that. And we, at that juncture, I think that we'd set a goal of 30% minority participation, and we were at about 43% over the whole project. Mm-hmm. So we were way beyond where we expected to be, and he should not have objected to doing the right thing here. But that's politics, you know.
Yeah, that's politics.
Yeah.
You know a lot about that.
Yeah. See, I'd been to so many Olympic Games and worked for so many Olympic sponsors that Zell felt like I could make a contribution there. He appointed me, then reappointed me, and it was a very interesting thing. it also got me unbelievable access, tickets, you know, the whole nine. So there was something of a payoff down the end of the road for the service put in.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the Atlanta Olympics compared to others you attended?
I don't know, you know, I mean, Beijing was just unbelievable. I don't know if you saw the opening ceremonies there, but they spent over $300 million on it. I think we spent 10 or 20 here, you know. I mean, it was just staggering. Sydney was better than Atlanta. But, you know, I think Atlanta did a decent job. I think the thing that, there were two issues that sort of fouled things up. One were all the street vendors, which, you know, made a pretty hunky-tonk feel to the thing. And then the other was Billy, very astute guy. He used all the money from the sponsors that came in and from the NBC to build the facilities. No state money, none of it was involved. And the IOC objected because they didn't get their slice of the pie. And that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, what happened in Atlanta, and then following that, what happened in Salt Lake City with the, you know, the bribing of, that put the U.S. in the penalty box. We're still not out of it. Chicago bid and should have gotten the games, but didn't. And I think it's because of what happened in both Atlanta and Salt Lake. But the games as a whole, in terms of the athletics of it, was great. You know, it was wonderful.
And good for the city.
Oh yeah, yeah, very good for the city. There's a lot of things that happened here following that you could attribute to the game. And of course, Billy came out great.
Yeah.
He's now running the Augusta National Golf Club, which is, for a retirement job, is about as good as it gets. Yeah.
Well, looking back, Bob, is there anything that we've missed?
You know, I tell you that probably is, but I finished, June and I were married 50 years on June the 5th, my wife. And I took on a 6-month project. I wrote a book about our family, going back as far as I could go. And there were about 1,700 photographs, because I had taken photographs of my own children, and my grandchildren, all the way, you know, from the day we were married. So I had a lot of that. But I went back and did some research into how her family and my family came to the U.S., how they got here. And her family story was more interesting than mine. And I don't know if you want me to tell it quickly, which sure. I can do. You know. Her forebearer came from southwest Germany in 1711. And it took them 6 weeks to go from southwest Germany to Rotterdam on the Rhine River, some creaky old boat. You know. So it was he and his wife and daughter and son. Well, they went from there, took a boat to the U.S. across the Atlantic. The ocean crossing took 3 months. Half the people on the ship died from disease. Luckily, her forebearer, his name was Carnegie, he survived. He and his family survived. And they were off course, so they landed near Jamestown, Virginia. And before they could land the boat, they were still out in the water, you know, shortly out in the water there. They were raided by pirates who took everything they had, including their clothes. So in the middle of the winter, they had to wade ashore naked. The people in Jamestown helped them get to their original destination, which was New Bern, South Carolina. They were there a year, and the people, the Englishmen, were hiring or using Indian women as slaves. And the Indians got upset. So they raided their development there, killed everybody, except the son of John Carnegie. He was a little kid, and he managed to get away. And That's how June came into being, you know. And what you realize when you go through a process like that, what a narrow passage there is for us to be living here alive in America today. I mean, it's a fascinating thing that how we slip through, you know. It really is very, very interesting. And I gave a copy of the book to each one of my grandchildren so they'd have what I didn't have. I had no idea when my father was born, nor my grandfather. You know, I had none of that because my parents died when I was so young. Mm-hmm. So the message was how lucky we are that these people went through what they went through, and we're here, you know, alive. None of us would be alive if it weren't for these people. So I dedicated the book to those people who managed to come out of the Ukraine, England, Germany, and France and create the possibility of us being alive here today.
Looking back, Bob, is there anything that you would have done differently in your career?
Oh, yeah. I think the one great regret I have is that at the time, we were hired by the Independent Bankers Association to fight the branch banking bill. And it was a big retainer for us, and it was legitimate. I mean, we weren't representing Michael Thieves or anything. It was a legitimate thing. And we lobbied the House and Senate, and we beat it in the Senate by 1 vote. I think as a result of that, the Atlanta banks were unable to grow, and the North Carolina banks were able to continue their growth, and ultimately led to them taking over all the banks here. I never even thought about that as a possibility. We were trying to protect the little banker in Eatonton, Georgia. You know, it was a noble sort of thing, you know, not let the big guys chew them up. But looking back on it, I got to say I'm sorry I did that.
Any regrets?
Regrets? As it relates to business or personally or what I don't know.
Politically, business, or personal?
I'd say that my biggest regret is that I wasted a lot of time in my life. Wasted time, you know. I was in the Air Force for 4 years, and complete waste of time. It resulted in a positive action, being able to get the GI Bill. But I mean, we used to sit in Alaska. I was up there for 2 years in the men's room, in the latrine, because it was the warmest place in the barracks, and play blackjack for hours on end. I mean, it was ridiculous. And and even now, once I retired, I find that I'm just killing time, you know, and it's. I wish I wasn't. I wish I could be helpful, but I'm not. You know, and so there's a lot of wasted time in my life that I wish I could have been more constructive during those periods of time.
Well, you've been helpful to us by remembering these great things about your career in Georgia politics and in business. So we want to thank you for that.
Okay. I regret that the state has become a Republican stronghold.
Yeah.
With Sonny Perdue.
Let's break.
Yeah. We were at I had taken my family up to Williamsburg to the Southern Governors Conference, and my oldest daughter, who was very young then, had to get back to school before I could get a plane to get her back there. So I asked the governor if he would be kind enough to fly her back with him, which he did. And Terry, who's now 48 years old, came home and painted a flag, an American flag, and gave it to the governor, and it still rests in the case up on the 3rd floor with other memorabilia of his. So that was really a neat little story about my family was fond of him because of that, really.
Which governor was this now?
Yeah.
Which governor?
Maddox.
Oh, Maddox.
Yeah, yeah. I have a picture of them in that plane. The one thing I didn't go into, and I don't know whether I need to, but despite his image, Maddox did quite a few good things, things that were not expected. And if you want me to go into some of those, I just have to go through my notes here. Going out of office, he had a favorable poll rating of 84%. He appointed more African Americans to state government positions than any governor before him. He appointed the first African American to head a State Department, named the first black GBI agent, named the first black trooper, state trooper, ordered state troopers to desist from using the word nigger and to address African Americans using Mr. instead of their first name. The other good story, which I forgot, was that there was a story that broke that in North Georgia in the middle of the winter, prison guards were using prisoners to retrieve ducks from the lake. I hope you remember that. When Maddox was asked about it, he said, what the state needs is a better class of prisoners. Famous quote of his. I mean, it was unimaginable that these people were doing that, but that was his response. And I guess, like I say, there's a whole slew of things that he did that were very good. A lot of it was lost. I looked last night, interestingly, they're on record at the University of Georgia, a lot of the Baldy Maddox cartoons. Very telling in terms of his term in office. But in the end, he did a lot of good stuff.
Tell us all about your experience at the convention. When was that, 68? When you were up there running Maddox for president.
Well, this is the front page of the New York Daily News, which shows the Georgia delegation led by Lester Maddox walking out of the Democratic Convention after he failed to get a acceptable compromise with the Julian Bond delegation. Maddox is not in the picture, unfortunately, but I am, right in the middle of it. And I've kept this thing because of that. It's not every day you get to appear on the front page of the New York Daily News. Mostly murders and rapes. But this was sort of a murder, in a way. But there's nowhere in the history books, I said earlier, where there's any mention of the fact that he ran for the Democratic nomination. And I'm here to tell you and show you this to prove that he did.